for joining us today, Molly.
Thank you.
It is so good to be here with you. And I appreciate you taking time out to share your story and your knowledge with our parent audience.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So before we get started, I guess the best way to start our conversation is I would ask you just to share a little bit about your airway journey with your child. How did it start? And where are you on that journey today?
Okay. Well, everything I have learned in the last 3 years and even the last 6 months, because it seemed to the information seemed to take a long period. I've been getting blips about airway health for 20 years, even longer, with my dad's apnea, for example.
Ah,
But
okay.
I was having, like slow little drop-ins of information, but it never came together the way that it has significantly in the last 3 years, 2 years, last 6 months. It seems that the information is just like compacting and coming in at full speed, and then I'm trying to process, and it's fascinating and really interesting.
Mhm.
So my husband comes home now, and I'm like, guess what I learned about today? So I guess I wish I'd known this all, obviously, before our oldest son was born about 7 years ago. With him, he was bottle fed from the start for a few reasons, and so I had some friends that kind of, you'd hear about the term tongue tie, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I didn't know enough about it, and I didn't think he, quote unquote, had an issue. And I know it's harder to catch when you're bottle fed.
Right.
But he had, in hindsight now, he had several. I think I casually mentioned it to a pediatrician. I was like, oh, no, no, he's fine, right? Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Maybe he's my first, and you're in that blur of the first.
Sure, right?
But in hindsight now, he had signs. He would have night terrors. His nervous system was pretty dysregulated early on, like a really happy kiddo, but would wake up all through the night. I mean, we were going through so many bottles, and people say he doesn't need bottles, he doesn't need that many. You're like, you don't understand. If he
Right.
doesn't get his bottle, it's a rage, right? If anyone's ever been through that. And so he also he didn't have a very high and narrow palate, but I was starting kind of learning about that.
Mhm.
um, the only way could get him to sleep for a nap was I had to take him for a car ride, and he would sleep better when he was with us, and not. There were just little blips.
Yeah.
Very full diapers overnight, very full, and I didn't learn that the correlation with that until our second one was born, and
How
um,
how far apart are they?
they are 3 years apart.
Okay. All right.
So when our second son was born, um, again, nursing struggles. This time, the signs were much more obvious, at least to me.
Okay.
Very high and narrow palate. He seemed to have restriction, but again, I went to a lactation consultant, five different pediatricians, and they were all like, no, 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 no,
Mhm.
you don't know what you're talking about. So, very light sleeper, very also night terrors at a very young age, and some that were
Mm.
very intense, and would go on for a very long time. I never noticed with either of them sleep apnea type stopping of breathing, but
Mhm.
I still thought there's something going on here. There's a lot more going on here, and
Yeah, it's the
this
mom
was
instinct, right?
yeah, and this was 4 years ago. So I feel like, especially in the last 6 months, a year, and maybe it's just that I'm way more aware of it now. Is the information really is now flooding in? I think to
Mhm.
make those connections between the emotional health and the nervous system and the airway and the lack of oxygen, and
Yeah.
um, so I thought we stopped trying to nurse. He was supplemented with a bottle, but we stopped trying to nurse with the second one at 3 months. I tried everything, and it was stressful for him. It was stressful for me.
Mhm.
When he'd stick out his little tongue, it was almost like a heart because it was so restricted.
Wow.
But yet, I didn't know anything, right? And
Right.
and so I kind of gave up at that point. He's 3 months old. I've got a toddler. It was the time when the world kind of started to fall apart and
Hmm.
it socially for a while, and so I was also more isolated than ever before. And
Right.
so it was probably, I think when he was almost a year old, is like, okay, we'll do the bottle. But he had the similar things with the very heavy diapers overnight. He also he would go through many, many bottles overnight, and it was that same pattern. And my husband and I are going, "What is going on here? What are we doing wrong?" And they weren't sleeping well. And we are a family who's really mindful about the types of food and getting outside a lot. And we tried, we thought all the tricks,
Hmm.
and we just were like, this doesn't make sense. But then we started also noticing some of the behavioral stuff, and I know that some of this behavior stuff is just simply that age. The brain is
Mm.
developing, the nervous system is developing, everything's developing. Um, but again, I was feeling those connections of there's something deeper here. There's something more here. And and again, what am I doing wrong?
Right. Well,
um,
that's that mom guilt, right? We all have that. It's
ah,
our fault, of course.
it's my fault that my kids don't listen. But yet they were listening, and I was trying to listen to them. Um, I'm fortunate I've been able to be home with them, so I kind of joke that I have had this Jane Goodall-esque front row seat to them,
Hmm.
and maybe hyper observe them more than they all would like. Um, and not in a pushy way, but just
Right.
like, oh, interesting. Um, so it was probably around when our youngest was about a year or so old. I found there was an Instagram page, uh, I think, and it noted that, and it was taught because I was looking down the tongue tie path more, but
Hmm.
I thought it was too late.
Mm.
But something blipped up across my path that said it's not too late. I mean, there are adults that get these things revised. And I thought, whoa,
Hmm.
wait a minute here. So that reignited that journey that I had already sort of been on. And I reached out to I'm one of those, like, once I feel that resonance and get excited, like, oh, like there's
Hmm.
a light bulb, I
Right.
dive full in and I
Follow
try to
that
figure
path.
out everything
Yeah.
I can. And again, it's like rapid fire processing. So I reached out to an oral myofunctional therapist. This is when we lived in a different state, and she had been a dental hygienist for decades, and
Hmm.
decided and was seeing enough of this pattern with children that's where
Hmm.
she wanted to support them. So we took him in. I think he was about a year and a half, and she said it's not too late, and he had so many of the signs. It was so validating to have that. Yes, the recessed jaw and the high and narrow palate, and his turbinates at that time hadn't swelled up, but they did about 6 months later.
Mm.
And so that caused more restriction. And then I was learning about how that tongue to the roof of the palate, it suddenly, like I said, all started to come flooding in. Um,
Hmm.
we moved shortly after that away from that state, so I wasn't able to continue with her, but I knew, okay, we're on a path now, and
Hmm.
now we're going to figure this out. So um in my impatience, it's taken longer than I would like, but again, what I have learned in the last 6 months has been, I'm so glad I was able to wait for that information. I read the first book I read was Breath by James Nestor,
Yep. Hmm.
and that connected so many more dots for
Yeah.
me. And I needed to understand it on a deeper level. And then it was not only connecting dots for my children and myself, and then my childhood, but then also my husband. There were things we've been together for 22 years, and there have been things with him I have just been chasing, symptom wise, that I can't get a hold of. And now
I
I'm
was
going,
gonna ask about that
there
because
it
you
is.
often hear it's in families. It
Yes.
runs.
And he and our youngest son are almost like little carbon copies of each other. The
Mm.
little one's a carbon copy of him. And so it was neat to be able to see that correlation, say, oh my goodness, there it is.
Hmm.
Um, and so again, my impatience kind of frustrates
Well,
frustrated, like, "Why can't
sure.
we fix it, like, right now that I know?" So our oldest, since he was less severe, and he had by that time, he had started grinding teeth, so, "Oh, okay,
Mm,
well, magnesium helps at night," which it did, but it didn't fix it, right?
right.
So he did have a buccal release and a tongue tie because he wasn't as severe. At the same time, we did some myofunctional therapy because I always knew, and there was so no information to be found for me at that time. It was piecing all of these things together and then trying to make the plan. And I felt like I was leading the charge a little too much because with like the dentist, for example, like she was very
Mm,
aware of it, but well, do I need a myofunctional therapist? Well, you could. And I thought, I feel like we should. But then it was finding one and getting on our wait list, and financially it all costs
yeah.
money. Insurance hardly
Hmm.
covered any of the tongue tie release. So we did do some of that. But then I thought, okay, and it cleared up his grinding at night, and it lessened some of his symptoms. Um, but still we were having some other struggles, and I can get to that later. But then with the younger one, I thought he is much more pronounced or severe. And
Hmm.
I thought if we just snip that tongue tie, because everyone was saying just snip it, um, he's not gonna know how to use that tongue.
Hmm.
And I thought, then
Right.
we're going to create another problem. And I don't want him to, if he already is struggling to breathe at night. At that point, he was kind of sleeping up, propped in my arm, because if
Mm.
he's
Oh,
down,
wow.
that jaw is
Yeah.
back. And I thought, I don't, I if we're already not getting very much sleep, I can't get less sleep because I'm worried that his tongue's going to flap back in the
Sure.
back of
Right.
his throat.
Right.
Like I need another stress. So, so what that paused his tongue tie release, and I'm really glad that it did, and he has not yet had one.
Okay.
That then sent us down a journey of working with a holistic dentist and getting he's our youngest has had a CT scan.
Hmm.
Yes, his airway is compromised. He has had a sleep study, and they did not find apnea, thankfully. And I have a little 4-year-old hooked up for a sleep study. That was an interesting night, and he handled it very well.
Sure. Oh,
Um,
good.
and that was our holistic dentist with that. It's our airway centered dentist had said,
Hmm.
let's do all of those things because that will determine, do we have other things going on? And it may help insurance cover some of this.
Hmm.
They did not find apnea, but I said, well, what about sleep disorder breathing? And uh, those doctors have never called me back to talk to me about that. So I've just figured, well, okay, whatever.
Hmm.
It's kind of like they don't need to tell me. I already know he's clearly struggling to breathe at night,
Right.
especially. Um, and then we have seen two ENTs, and they both noted that he didn't seem to have the swollen adenoids and tonsils. And I wouldn't have been on a path to just have them removed without further exploration.
Hmm.
But they did say, well, let's just try Flonase. And I thought, that sure we could. But everything I've read, and I started asking about the tongue and the air, everything that I've
Hmm.
learned, and
Hmm.
neither were willing to have that conversation with me. They
Hmm.
just wanted to try Flonase and move along. One actually, and I'll say this, he actually went so far as to say, well, if neither of you are sleeping, I think you should just Ferberize him and he'll figure it out and then you'll sleep better. And you could feel the oxygen just suck out of the room at that moment. I thought,
Yeah.
I'm not a combative person, and I'm really willing to talk about this. We're done here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he kind of backpedaled. Oh, I'm not trying to tell you how to parent. I thought, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So, so that part's been frustrating, but almost validating too. Like, nope,
So,
I,
so why haven't you gone through the with the tongue tie release yet?
um, he, we are on the path with him. So he hasn't had myofunctional therapy in a while. We've been doing stuff at home.
Okay.
We've been using tools at home. We've tried the munchie. He's got the myo spots.
Hmm.
And he is breathing more through his nose. Um, we haven't done the tongue tie release yet because I just yet. With the holistic dentist, we have talked about upper and lower ALF expanders.
Hmm.
The struggle there is financially that's more of an investment than I can do.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're aware of how much it is, but I was having to say, okay, well, we're gonna have to pick one of the boys and only he'll get this help and maybe we'll work on the other one later, but the other one's already losing teeth. And so I know like even the jaw growth,
Hmm.
it's he's
Yeah.
7. So his is but I was choosing the 4-year-old because he's the one that's not sleeping very well. So or um I've had a lot of these start stops, but where we are right now is I have recently found a cranial
Hmm.
osteopathic physician,
Hmm.
and she's only worked on them both twice, but they both love her. The youngest one said just yesterday, when do we get to go back to Dr. Tracy? Because she helps me feel better.
Oh, wow.
So I know with him, it's one of those, I think, chicken or the egg and cascade effect scenarios that I'm learning is, and this won't be the case for everybody, but, or it could be, did the nervous system dysregulate the airway and the airway dysregulate the nervous system, or is it both? And there's just so much overlap. And that's kind of where I
Hmm.
am with both of them. So I'm working on that with the cranial osteopath to help that autonomic nervous system and with everything in the head, the
Hmm.
muscles and the ligaments and the bones and the vagus
I
nerve
was gonna say the vagus nerve. Yeah.
especially. So, um, and all of that, it's so beautiful how it's all connected.
Hmm.
Um, so we are going to her, and then I did because of the expense of the expanders, which we may be in that boat someday. Um, but it's not today. I have recently signed up with the tooth pillow as I was
Okay.
learning about that. And so I thought, okay, well, that's more of an entry point that we can do. That's something we can do at home. Um, and there's a whole virtual app system. So I can help both boys right now. We're working on the nervous system and let's see where we are in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years,
Yeah.
and see if that helps regulate things. And for the first time in a long time, I'm finally feeling like we got this.
Yeah.
We got this.
We
There
have
was
a
a
plan.
battle. We have a plan,
Oh, yeah.
but we're finally here.
Yeah.
It's and so the younger one, since he's been going to that cranial osteopath, the first night he went to her, he came home and he slept 11 hours breathing through his nose.
Wow.
If that child had not gone to that doctor that day, I probably would have woken him up, taken him to the emergency room,
Hmm.
thinking something was wrong because we have never had that. And then after the second appointment, it wasn't the first day. He was a little grumpy the first day after that appointment, but the next day was Christmas Eve, and he fell asleep at 5:30. And this is a kiddo who is involved in everything. He likes to cook.
Okay.
He likes to clean. He likes to organize. He likes to plan. And he's only 4. But he fell asleep on Christmas Eve. He missed the dinner he made. He missed the cookies for Santa. He missed all of that because he slept for 14 hours.
Oh my goodness.
And people may say that it might be a coincidence. I don't think at all.
Mm-mm.
He was
I don't think so.
finally coming down. And we talk so much about and I think it's interesting. I'm not talking at them. It's like we're learning together and I'm sharing with
Mm.
them what I'm learning. We talk so much about the tongue and the breathing and the nervous system that like both of them get it. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, we're finally on a path. And it finally feels like things are calming down.
And is his sleeping consistent now to where it's
More consistent, yes,
okay.
more consistent. They're both more consistent. They both more so, I think our oldest one usually wakes up once a night. Um,
Okay.
but the youngest one is waking up less and less and less. And you can tell he's sleeping more soundly. When he wakes up in the morning, I mean, he's one of the happiest little 4-year-olds you're ever going to meet, both of them. But we'll say like he's like Buddy the elf. He's just,
Hmm.
hey, he's here. But when he's not sleeping, you've got the Hulk. Like it is the
Oh,
other, and it's a lot. It's a lot.
well, sure, because it's very disruptive.
It's so disruptive. And so I mean, all of the podcasts and the articles and I'm so grateful for all of these Instagram accounts and these
Hmm.
myofunctional therapists and that are
Hmm.
sharing so much information. Um, and and the books I've read, I mean, I've read what was it, the Tired Child? That was
Hmm.
another favorite
Yeah,
that
that's a
connected a
great
lot of
one.
dots for me. Um, so it's really, really neat to have learned about all of this stuff and how it's playing out and even how it like, not just the emotional, but also learning delays and learning struggles and how that
Hmm.
it's
It's
I think
amazing how
sometimes
connected it all is.
so connected. And I think sometimes when I talk to now, when I, of course, when I talk to friends or whoever about it, I think sometimes they think like, oh, of course you're going to think it's connected. I'm thinking it is connected.
It is connected. The
It
more we find out, the more it is.
is. Yeah,
It's wild.
it
It's wild. Well,
really
first
is.
first I would commend you because you are absolutely what we call the airway mama bear.
Thank you.
That this is, and we need more of you because this is how we're going to move this forward and make these changes.
Yeah.
You've done all this hard work, and so I absolutely commend you for
Thank
that, for
you.
advocating and just
Thank you.
staying with it. So
Thank
for
you.
people that don't know, I want to go back for just a second. You mentioned the tooth pillow.
Yeah,
So for parents that don't know what that is,
sure.
will you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, from what I understand, ours is in the mail. I think it's supposed to come here. It's supposed to arrive tomorrow. So, what I've learned through their website is really comprehensive. There's a lot
Yeah.
of information there and a lot of
And we'll put
videos.
a link to it too.
Yeah. Um, and that's what I also was so impressed because, as you probably can gather already, I like a lot of information
Hmm.
and I'll ask a lot of questions and I have to understand it. And so I really appreciated all of the information they put out there. It's a device that they wear. It looks like an athletic mouth guard.
Hmm.
And I think it has like a lip to teach the tongue where to rest.
Hmm.
So it's not just in there, but it also has a place to help with that tongue. Um, and they'll wear it. They're supposed to wear it for an hour every day, and then ideally all night long. And the before and afters, obviously, I don't know these people, but the before and after photos I've seen, and there's a parent Facebook group, is people are excitedly sharing about, oh my goodness, look at how fast my child's palate is expanding and the
Hmm.
arches and it's to help the tongue learn to stay up at the top of the
Right where
palate.
it's supposed to be. Hmm.
Yeah, and it's not going to hold it there for them, but it will help them, and then that will help naturally expand that archway instead of
Hmm.
having a device in there, like an ALF or a myo brace or
Hmm.
something
To
like
push it out.
that, to push it out for them. And like again, we may be that route, but I'm willing to try this one first.
Yeah.
Um, so it's we ordered one for both boys, and they're what's neat because we've been having these conversations is they both ask me, when is our tooth pillow coming? So I was
Wow.
able to say today, tomorrow it's coming. I checked the tracking, it's coming tomorrow. So and I think what's also neat about kids, especially since we have so many conversations, is they want to feel better. They
Sure.
don't like feeling this way, and they don't like the feedback they get. I mean, as a parent, you can only be so patient, and there are some days where it's so intense. With my
Hmm.
youngest, even I've had to say, "Buddy, you stop. You got to back off a little bit, kiddo."
Yeah.
And then we're both cut, and then we're both
Yeah.
dysregulated.
Right. Then time out for everyone, right?
We need a break. And that's so I know that everyone is just looking all of the recipe that we've kind of put together to help our family. Now it's still really important to me that we limit screen time and that
Hmm.
we if they're those myo spots have been really neat. There's those little they just dissolve. You stick
Hmm.
it right back
Hmm.
here. And so if they do have TV time, or if I notice that they're kind of tea kettle talking, I try to say it like when it really goes up and they're just not breathing and they're
Oh,
just
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and you're like,
Hmm.
oh, then hey, do you need a tongue button? Okay. And then if we put on a show, then they have that and they naturally just fidget with it, which helps just take that deep breath.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of time outside, and we're mindful of all sorts of things. All of that's still important. Every kid is a recipe, but um, I don't know if I answered that question about the tooth
No,
fairy, but it's a
you
device to
did.
help. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, you absolutely did. And that,
Okay.
so I think you touched on a little bit of it, but what were some of the biggest hurdles that, you've had to overcome along this journey?
Um. Well, I think one of the biggest ones was a mental hurdle of the financial part about so much
Hmm.
of it. Because I absolutely agree that a myofunctional therapist is worth what they're charging.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I can afford it once a week for
Hmm.
two kids.
Right. And it's not
Um,
always covered.
and the holistic airway dentist, again, insurance, not
Hmm.
in the frustration is insurance has hardly covered anything for
Hmm.
what has actually been helpful. Um, and so that's always a frustration because you think, oh, there's so many kids who could get help.
Hmm.
Um, if only, right? And
Right.
so that's a big thing. And then because I'm home, I work for myself. So because I'm home, I've been able to invest all of this time and energy into the education so I
Hmm.
can, understand what we're doing and where we're going. And then also the time to get them to any of these appointments.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think that was another thing that I appreciated about the whole tooth pillow process because I'm not going into the dentist once a month for adjustments. I'm not making the myofunctional therapist appointments once a week.
Right.
And then because it's all right there on the app. And that's huge right now. And I understand there are families that are way busier than I am. And it's, I know some people will say, well, if you need it, it comes down to priorities. And sure, that's true. But there are only so many hours in the day.
Exactly.
And we just hit, and then the capacity, and then you talk about nervous system dysregulation, then you're more stressed about both those
Right.
things.
Right. And this tooth pillow thing, it's not an exact apples to apples comparison,
Yeah.
but um, there used to be a time for mental health. The only way you
Mhm.
could get help was to go into somebody,
Mhm.
right? Well, now we've realized not everybody can get in there. So now we have that online. We have,
Yeah.
telemedicine because if your kid just has sniffles or I don't know, something, small and you don't, or maybe you're a single parent, you can't get them in, whatever it is. Now
Yep.
we have telemedicine.
Yep.
So to me, that's just another example of how we're adapting medicine
Yeah.
to treat people where they're at. How can we help people?
Yeah. Definitely. And it's so there are just so many kids.
Yeah.
There's so many
Yeah.
kids, and I and I've known for a long time. I mentioned my dad had the apnea, or
Hmm.
still has it, and so I see down the road where that goes,
Hmm.
health wise, and
Hmm.
and then even I now I in hindsight I think back, I had a lot of cavities as a kid, and I grew up thinking like, oh,
Mm.
it's just you didn't brush enough or you didn't whatever. Well, now what I'm learning is it's probably most often not the diet in the sense that yes, brushing teeth is important. Yes, nutrient dense foods are important,
Hmm.
but it's also like the microbiome and the air and the pH, the airway and the pH and the mouth breathing.
Hmm.
And that was another thing I didn't mention with our kids. They were getting early cavities, and I thought, well, hold on a minute. Like, my husband's an organic farmer. Like, how are we getting cavities here?
Right. Right.
Like, we're doing all, for the most part. There's no perfect system, but that was another big aha moment for me. Is why are they getting these cavities? This doesn't make sense to me.
Mm.
And well, because they're breathing through their mouths, and
Right.
and I'm almost positive that plays a majority role in the cavities that they have.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Right. Because we know that link is there.
Yeah, and it
It's
wasn't
absolutely there.
So I think it's another interesting kind of frustration along this way, and I imagine it's pretty common, is the pushback that I've gotten, or the dismissal perhaps, from whether
Mm-hmm.
it's medical professionals or those that I know, kind of look at like, well, what do you know? That kind of a,
Yeah.
where you have
Yeah.
to stand up and say like, okay, well, you have not spent hundreds of hours on this like I have.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I
Mm-hmm.
never thought I would, but here I am, and it kind of chose me, and here we are.
Right. Right.
So
Right. And, I can tell you firsthand, just with my journey, as well as, with our founder, Andy, once you start down this rabbit hole
yeah.
of reading, and it's so funny too, because you mentioned James Nestor's book,
Hmm.
um, which I will put a link for, but he is on our advisory board.
Okay.
I swear that is the gateway book. That is what has started this journey for so many
I
people.
believe it.
You start with that, and then you end up with, you know, Gasp and Brave Parent and The Tired Child, and it starts building, and
Yeah.
you start seeing more and more research, and you hear it from different providers, and once you see it and you understand it, you can't go back.
You can't. There's no way I could go back. No,
Mm-mm.
I say to my husband, well, everybody, I think anyone close to me knows, Molly has a giant whiteboard in her head with lines and connections.
Yep.
And I often send this little, what they call it, GIF, to of this Charlie Day character. I don't even know what movie it's from. I could even
Hmm.
send it to you so you know what I'm talking about. But he's like, when you're solving a case and they've got the board up with
Yep.
all of the lines, and
The
he's like
mind mapping.
doing
Yeah.
this. And I said, this is how I feel. I'm this guy.
Hmm.
Because it is, you can't unsee it. And I've often said it's this beautifully, sometimes tragic web of connection
Yeah.
of all of it.
Yeah.
And
That's a
so,
really great explanation. Yeah, it
yeah,
is.
it really, it's so wild to me. And I've had such amazing conversations with other moms, especially most recently.
Hmm.
Some have sort of been in this realm already, and we're just now connecting, or some are close friends that have gone, Tell me more about what you were saying the other day."
Hmm.
And that's been really neat. Um, and it's just, again, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. Especially when you start uncovering things
Yeah.
like depression, how it's connected
Mhm.
to depression.
Yeah.
And, that was the Surgeon General's number one task. What was it, 2 years ago, he put out this huge band-aid on it. And the way depression has permeated the lives of this youngest generation coming through, to me, I
Yeah.
mean, hey, that's kind of an eye opener. Let's all take a step back and try to
Yeah.
figure out what's going on.
What's going on?
I'm not saying
Well,
it's always the case, but it's so interesting when you read all this research and you
right.
start to see, it manifests and impacts ADHD, and you'll
Yes.
see it in depression, and
Yep.
they can't sleep, and it just, oh, it's
It's wild.
yeah, it's wild. It is wild.
Well, and what also led me through this path when I was doing the nervous system stuff, and then the delays, like, and with labels, I'm hesitant on labels because I think that sometimes people over identify. But I've said
Hmm.
to my husband, well, we seem to have symptoms of this type of label over here. So let's
Hmm.
kind of move forward as if we do, but I'm going to keep digging. I'm going to keep
Okay.
digging and
Right.
see. And because that can give us some more clues too. But I was able to, with our oldest, was having some learning delays in kind of the left side hemisphere brain work.
Hmm.
Creative, like right side, all fired up, ready to go. But delays in the left side, and so it's been interesting having these conversations too with his support team at school to say, "Hey, you know what? I'm not gonna put him in a box. Not yet. We're not going there.
Yeah.
I do think, but I that, you know, I think we've got this airway stuff and this nervous system dysregulation, and I think they're tied in, and maybe some primitive reflexes. I've learned about those. Those are cool.
Yeah. Oh, I'll put a link to that podcast too for people that haven't heard
Yeah,
that. That's
yeah.
insane.
It's
Yeah.
so awesome. And so,
Wow.
like, I think this is what we've got going on, and I think you're going to see some big jumps from him soon.
Hmm.
And they are now seeing jumps. But what was neat is they were receptive to that. I don't know if, at least they were in my presence, right? I don't. They might think like, oh man, here's this mom, but and I could be that mom. That's
Yeah, but once they see it,
fine. But to be able to, right, again, and they have access to way more kids than I do to support, and that's why I shared it, because I thought, if what I believe, if I believe so strongly that this is helping my children, then
mhm,
surely it could help
it's
other
going to help
kids, and they
others.
won't think it's going to help others. And um, so when I was learning about the primitive reflex, that all dropped in the last, handful
Hmm.
of months too.
Couple
There's
months. Yeah.
I don't know if you know about Dr. Josh Madsen. He's in Iowa. He's
Hmm.
doing some really cool work, functional neurology. And
Yeah.
then Dr. Tony Ebel with PX Docs. Um,
And I don't
he's
know.
had some really awesome connections with, he's a neurologically focused chiropractor, but he
Okay.
has a network across the country. And then, like I mentioned, our cranial osteopath. So I think they're all doing really similar work that are helping these children unlock this stuff, and they're starting to find that it's helping to unlock those labels that have been given, those delays that they
Hmm.
were told they're not doing fast enough,
Right.
and various other struggles. And I think, I know that they all blur and blend.
Well, and it's that cross-functional thing, right? If you can
Yes,
get, and I can say this, not as a medical professional, but we have an advisory board full of
sure.
some of just these amazing individuals. And I'll sit in a meeting and listen to them. When you get these cross-functional groups together in these conversations and they start piecing things, it's
Yeah,
mind-blowing. And that's one of the things we advocate for is putting together these teams to work with these children,
yeah.
because it's a whole child instead of these siloed approaches.
Right. Right, because it's not it exactly. And that's, I think that's, because humans were so good at saying, well, this is this and this is this. And no, there's no connection. You're like,
Right,
well, that's not true. Come on.
right, right. It's all connected.
Well, and what's interesting, I think, I mentioned I've been having blips of this my whole life with my dad, but also I have a dear friend who, gosh, 20 some years ago, I met her through the horse world, and we were doing chiropractic on the horses. And when I was 17, I got certified to do horse massage. I don't do it
Oh,
anymore.
wow.
But even back then, how much more that we've done for our pets than our own
Than
children, I think,
ourselves.
than
Yep.
ourselves. Because I think, and people have heard me say this a lot, I think we humans are so cute that we forget that we are nature, right? We are
Hmm.
mammals too. So, um, things that we would do for our pets or our livestock or whatever, we're delayed to do for ourselves sometimes.
Hmm.
So
Right,
it's
right.
nice
Agreed.
catching up.
Yeah.
Um,
So, what advice would you give parents, especially those that are just starting this journey? Maybe, that's why we do these podcasts, right? Because
yeah,
we were trying to reach parents that have an inkling that something's wrong with, they're not sure what. And, we're not saying this is exactly what's wrong with your child. So please don't
sure.
take that as gospel and run with it. But what kind of advice do you give parents that are just starting this journey?
I think, whether it's someone with an infant, it's their first time infant, which I know that time when you're tired and you're probably pretty depleted and your minerals are depleted. So
Oh,
first, like,
yeah.
try to boost up your own minerals. That'll help
Right.
your
And your
brain
hormones are
function.
out of
Yeah.
whack. And
Yeah, like,
oh, yeah.
yeah, like, I know it's hard. But try to get some good nutrient dense food in you. Find a doula who can, even
Mm,
postpartum, who can help support you there.
right.
And find a good team. I think a lot of people spend time on, like, oh, what crib should we buy, or what, all of the
Hmm.
toys, right? That we've all seen the
Right.
baby
Right.
shower
Right.
list. But I think we need to shift maybe what those baby shower lists should be, is like a postpartum doula, and making sure you have a good team who will bring you good nourishing food. So that would be my first, like, if you're just having an infant, like boost yourself up because you're already stressed and depleted. And I've been there, and it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
work through that when you're stressed and depleted.
Oh, yeah, it
It
is.
is, it feels impossible. And for some it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so but I think if you feel that there is something deeper, don't give up. It may be really easy to give up. I mean, there are times where I paused and, or questioned, like, well, am I crazy here? But you know your child better than anybody.
Mm-hmm. Trust your
Anybody.
instincts.
Trust your instincts. And there are so many, and I know some people even have to um struggle with even their own partner believing them. And that's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
that can
Right.
that's not easy. So I think now more than ever, there are so many resources that were not available
Mm-hmm.
when even my 4-year-old was an infant. And if there was, I wouldn't have known where to find it. I mean, I said I even went to a lactation consultant that I thought would be able to help us. I thought, well, surely she's going to tell me we have a tongue tie. But
Right.
she didn't, and that
Mm-hmm.
that was a lot of money spent to still come out disappointed. Um, so yeah, trust your instincts, and there are resources out there. I mean, you all are one of them,
Sure.
and
Are there any others that come to mind that would be a great place, in your opinion, for someone to start besides the
well,
CAF website?
sure. I think what I've figured out with the body work, because sometimes, with the tethered tissue, that's the fascia system.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it may not be as severe as needing a tie clipped. Maybe it's you just need to loosen things up.
Mm-hmm.
Think about even coming out the birth canal, or if it's a C-section. My youngest was a C-section. There's a lot of movement on those soft tissues when
Mm-hmm.
that baby was just like curled up like this for a little while, and suddenly we're like pulling on them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's not a gentle process for
Mm-hmm.
most kids, and so I think early body work, whether it's a like a Gillespie
Mm-hmm.
cranial fascial therapist, Gillespie method, or the PX docs, the nervous system based chiropractic. Um, and it's not just PX docs. There are other nervous system based chiropractors, and it's not. I think some people go, "Oh, a chiro." I've been there, and they really crank on your neck, or it's different for babies.
It's
They're not gonna
yeah.
just get in
No, it's
there.
so different.
It's so different, and it's just soft, gentle release. And
Mm-hmm.
our doctor, our cranial osteopath, she had said, and I loved when she said it. She said, I wish every labor and delivery room had a cranial osteopath in that room right as the baby came out, so we can,
Same
you know,
girl.
hold
Same.
them and
Yep.
release that, and that would set
Yes.
off so many, um,
Yes.
and on a good path. And
Hmm.
so it,
And they can get up in there and with their thumb and just
yeah,
and that palette.
yeah, and just kind of loosen
Wow.
things up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a lot of body workers out there who understand the body as a whole.
Hmm.
And
Right.
I our pediatrician is fairly holistically minded. We've had a lot of great conversations, but
Mm-hmm.
again, it's in order to work with him, it's out of pocket because he doesn't take insurance, because he'll give you an hour per kid.
Mm-hmm.
And that means a lot to me. It means we don't see him very often, and he's available, and not because, I mean, my kids are pretty healthy,
Yeah.
thankfully. Um, and we rarely need him, but it's it's being okay with being outside of that system, the main system, and taking that deep breath and knowing what you know. And sometimes you have to be a little brave and say,
Mm-hmm.
well, that doesn't make sense to me, or, I'm going to read more. But I know it can be hard to
Yeah.
stand up to all of that.
Yeah. And
And to
speaking of
feel like,
Brave, I'll put that link to Brave Parent in here too, because that's one of the things that Dr. Maples is talking about. Because it is hard.
yeah,
It's hard to be a brave parent right now.
it is. There are so many different categories of things that we've got to be brave about and navigate. And my kiddos, I love to talk. Um, but we've been having, even when they're little, like we've had some big conversations about stuff, and because I think sometimes we don't give kids enough credit for what they can understand
Yes.
and they
Mm-hmm.
can take accountability for within their own bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when if they, just like with me, once I understand something, okay, like I'm good to go. And I
Yeah.
think that's similar with them is giving them more credit and maybe bringing them in on a little bit more so they
Sure.
can
Hold space for them.
articulate
They
a
may
lot.
not know the words,
Right.
but if you hold space for them and just kind of let them express themselves, then
Yep.
again, to your point, you know your children better than
Yep.
anyone. Still, you'll get to know what they're saying. You'll start to watch their mannerisms and see the changes and
Yep.
Mhm. Totally.
Yeah, and I think that's some of it, so often moms get it's mostly moms that get the like, "Ugh, you're just gonna worry about that. Oh, you're gonna worry about that." And that's been a story for a long time. And I think it's
Yeah.
more we're so in tune to them. And when their little bodies and their nervous systems, this is how I've described it about my kiddos, when they're both in a spin, one's going this way and one's going this way. And it's like chaotic incoherence of energy.
Hmm.
And then I'm in the middle. And you try to be the eye of the storm, you try to be the calm spot, but we also feel all of that
Sure.
incoherence. And
Hmm.
I think that's what then dysregulates us, and it's almost like we need to get with help
Hmm.
coming up above that as best we can so we can think clearly to help them. And I know so deeply when one's going one way and one's going the other way, how hard it is to still stay on track and
Yeah.
to be the brave parent and say, no, this isn't just, oh, because they're 4 and they're 7. This isn't
Hmm.
just because there's something deeper going on here. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're finally, like I said, there is more coherence and they're able to even articulate that more. I
Yeah.
mean, a
Yeah.
4-year-old saying, "Can I go back to that one doctor mom? She helped
Right.
me." Like that's huge. We haven't been I
That
think it's
is
been about
huge.
a month since we've been. So,
Right. And just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal. So we
yes.
need to stop normalizing some of these things.
Yes, that's a huge
Right.
thing too. I Some of the entry conversation I've had with people are about like, "Okay, well, your husband snores or your dad snores and everyone jokes like, ha ha ha, isn't it
Yeah.
funny?" It's
Yeah.
not
It's
funny.
not. Mm-mm. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not funny at
That's a
all.
myth we need to break. It is not
Yeah,
funny.
it's not
Yeah.
funny. So I share a lot of these myofunctional therapists and airway dentists on my personal social media. And I feel like sometimes like, oh man, I'm sharing something all the time, but I'm hoping that somebody catches it and goes,
Yeah.
hey, we have that.
Hmm.
Oh, is that what that's connected to? Because even that simple, like, close the baby's mouth and
Hmm.
the tongue suction. I didn't know our tongue's supposed to be suctioned to the top of our mouth. I had no idea.
I didn't know that. And I've said this before, I have a science background. And, my grandfather even was a professor or dean at the UT Medical School or for dental school.
Hmm.
I'm around these people, right?
Right.
I should know these things.
Yeah.
I didn't know that until, I first started working here. And I have an airway disorder.
Hmm.
And at no point in the 20 years almost of having this had anyone pointed that out to me.
Yeah. Why aren't we
So,
talking about it? Yeah.
right. And then I start talking to all these different doctors, and they're turning around saying, well, yeah, we went to med school and no one told us. I'm going, wait, what? So,
Wait a minute. Yeah.
so I was already kind of shook thinking, how did I not know this? And, here are these professionals. It's just mind blowing to me.
It really is. And
Absolutely mind blowing. So for parents,
I
again, don't feel guilty because
no.
so many people didn't know.
But yeah, I think most people, yeah, I would say most people don't know.
Most people don't know.
I mean, I
Mm-mm.
mentioned my dad's apnea. I don't know when he was officially diagnosed. He had a heart attack very, very early.
Hmm.
He was only 38, so I don't know how old that makes me. I was little. I was in middle school, I think. I don't think he was diagnosed with apnea. I don't think it was right after that. I think it still took several years. and he got the CPAP machine, and suddenly he was like, because he was up all night long. We all just, that was what
Mm-hmm.
dad just,
Yep.
he would sleep on the couch with the TV because he was up all night long.
Think
Um,
about all the sitcoms we grew up with, like All in the
yeah,
Family, and some of these shows where it was a joke.
it was just a joke. You could hear, you
Hmm.
could hear my dad
You could
snoring
hear them.
outside.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, wow, oh, what? But no idea. I can almost guarantee his doctor never talked to him about that stuff. And he's not very
And
good
it's,
about using that apnea machine. And recently I've said, where's your tongue? And are you
yeah.
and I it's baffling to me. And
Yeah.
I did actually, okay, so I did tell him recently to have a conversation with his primary and his cardiologist. I said, if they're talking to you about high blood pressure, but they're not talking to you about your
Yes.
apnea and your airway, then you
Hmm.
can tell them that they aren't worth their degree, and you can even have them call me. And that's, I know, very bold to say. But I said, if they're not touching on that, then they're just giving you more pills and they're not helping you.
Right. But you know what? That's exactly an example of what I've heard because they weren't taught that in school.
Mm-mm,
They're just doing what they were taught. So it's
mm-mm.
just,
And it's
it's
up to us
amazing.
patients to say, I have something medically with me that I guess I learned some of my bravery pre-kids with doctors where a lot of them would deny, no,
Hmm.
and I learned
Right.
how to move on to maybe somebody
Hmm.
else. And but when I had the first doctor that looked at me and said, "Thank you for teaching me something new. How do you want me to support you on this?" I thought,
Wow.
"You're in. You're
Yeah.
in." Because now we can start that conversation.
Mhm. And you know
And
what? We've had providers on here before too that have said, never stop learning, right?
yeah,
We went through medical school, but, and you go get your CEs or your CMEs, whichever side of the house you're on, and keep learning. You never
yeah,
are going to know everything. So keep learning because science changes and evolves as we learn.
yeah, it does. And there's so, and I empathize. I realize they see a lot of people, and
Oh,
there's the
yeah.
pressure of the insurance system. I know that there's a lot at
Yeah.
them, but at the same time, she did tell me those things, and she's been receptive to
Hmm.
whenever I've brought her, surprise, surprise, I've brought her information and said, "Can you look at this?" And she's open to it. And I
Hmm.
realize not every doctor can or wants to or whatever. It's all nuance, um, but it's still sitting in that bravery and going forward. And
And
do we
it's,
do we want do we want band-aids or do we want healing?
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah,
And you have to do what you have to do. And, I had to move across the country to find a provider that could support me in that way because, the other was doing exactly what they were taught, but
yeah,
it wasn't working. So you keep fighting, you keep trying, you keep working, right? As airway moms, you just keep advocating.
yeah. There was another book I read recently too called, and it's written by a dentist, and I don't remember her name, but you may know of it. It's called in the Moms in the Trenches, I think is the name. Yeah, that one. Yeah, that
This would
one.
be the book. Yeah.
That's the one.
Yes, yes.
um,
And I'll put a link
yeah,
to that
and
one
it was
on
just
there
a
as
nice
well.
quick read, but I thought, yep, okay, there we are. It was
Hmm.
just another one of those wonderful validations,
Yeah.
and all coming together. So,
Yeah, yeah. And for anyone that thought that was a plant, that wasn't a plant. That's actually an upcoming giveaway. So
oh,
that's
really?
why I had it.
I've got
I
it. I
had
don't know
it
if
right
you can
here.
see my bookshelf up at the top. I've got it. It's up there somewhere.
Yeah, it's up there. Yeah, mine's
Yeah.
blurred, but it's just full of all the things, the research that we've done, and
Yeah.
so I cannot thank you enough for coming on and sharing your story and I hate to say tips, but guidance and
Yeah.
just everything that you have shared to help our parent audience. I really, really
Thank
appreciate it,
you.
Molly.
Well, thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
I hope that more kids can and parents can find help.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
agreed.
thank you.